Congressman John Sarbanes is with us, U.S. Congressman from Maryland's 3rd District. Sarbanes.house.gov is the website. Congressman, welcome to the program.
Thanks very much, Tom. Good to be here.
And thanks for showing up at the FamiliesUSA.org Radio Row there. So your thoughts on what happened this morning at the Supreme Court?
Well, of course, everybody's trying to read the tea leaves on the arguments. I remain very hopeful that the court will apply very basic and common sense rules of construction when you look at a piece of legislation, which means you look at the whole thing as a package, and will conclude that the subsidies and the tax credits, which are a key component of the Affordable Care Act, should remain in place. So obviously we'll have to wait and see the ultimate outcome, but that would certainly be the common sense legal construction to apply here.
Yeah, I think Scalia suggested, perhaps indirectly, that if Congress simply were to add 2 words to the legislation, which they could do with a one-page piece of, with a one-page bill, where it says, people will be eligible for subsidies if they buy their insurance on an exchange established by the state or federal government. If they just put those 2 words in, this case would not even happen.
Right, but those words are not necessary. Again, if you look at the whole package, if you look at it in context, if you look, frankly, at the statements in debate on the House floor from Republican leaders like Paul Ryan and others who assumed from the very get-go that these credits would apply regardless of whether they were in states where there were state-sponsored exchanges or federally sponsored exchanges. If you put it in that context, it's very clear that that was the intent, and no one questioned that intent at any point along the way. It wasn't until you got this lawyer out of Greenville, South Carolina, who decided to go lift, 4 or 6 words out of this 1,000-page tome and make an issue of it that it even got traction. But I think the reasonable construction of it is that placed in context, those credits remain in force.
Speaking of, or in the context of a conversation about trajectory, if we could for a moment, we have either the Republican trajectory, which is that the Affordable Care Act gets blown up, it starts to fall apart, the individual states bail out. You got half the states right now that refuse to expand Medicaid, quack, 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 and we end up back, with 50% of all bankruptcies in the United States being caused by people getting sick and 45,000 people a year dying because they're not insured. Or, alternatively, if the Supreme Court upholds Obamacare, then presumably there are next steps that the Democratic caucus is talking about, because Obamacare still is costing us, we the nation, twice as much as the healthcare systems of every other developed country in the world, and it isn't insuring every single American. What are the next steps on either of those trajectories?
Well, I think you continue to build people, create access for people into these health exchanges. You keep in place the trajectory of savings that we're beginning to realize in the Medicare system, the Medicare program, as a result of changes that were made under the Affordable Care Act. You prosecute fraud and abuse in the Medicare program and the Medicaid program, and there's resources that were committed to that are beginning to show tremendous return on investment. So, in fact, we're beginning to realize some significant savings as a result of the Affordable Care Act. And the biggest savings, I think, will come from this turn towards prevention and primary care, which has never been a strong suit of our healthcare system, and means that we spend a lot of money on the back end of care instead of stepping in earlier with interventions that can reduce the cost of care and, frankly, serve patients better. One of the central components of the Affordable Care Act was to begin focusing on that prevention piece as we begin to infuse our healthcare system with that particular approach. I think we're going to see tremendous savings and enhanced quality of care, and there's a lot of things Democrats can continue to put forward that'll help reinforce that.
If Republicans don't hold the House and Senate and White House in 2016, and Democrats want to go a step farther than they've gone so far with the Affordable Care Act, do you think that something like John Conyers' H.R. 676, every Medicare for all, anybody can sign up for Medicare. Basically, we already have a single payer system. Is that the way to go, or is it tweaking the ACA, or what?
I think you can look at a lot of different opportunities. You may recall that there was a grand debate first over whether we should have a single payer system, and then over whether we should have a public option within these healthcare exchanges. At the very least, I'd like to see us revisit this notion of a public option, and that could take the form of an option for people to get into the Medicare program other than through the current door. And so we ought to explore that, particularly if it could produce some efficiencies in terms of overhead. I mean, the system we have, these exchanges are largely an access point for the existing private health insurance industry, but they still have pretty significant overhead. Medicare, for example, has 3 or 4% overhead administratively. It's a pretty efficient program. So to the extent you could design a public option that would give people access to that, and enjoy the benefits of reduced overhead, it ought to be something we could look at going forward. Look, we're still making changes to the Medicare program that's 50 years old. This is in process always. You always want to refine it. You want to make it better. The problem is when we spot things that can be done to make it better now, our opportunity to go in and improve the act is blocked by the fact that if we open it up, the Republicans will simply seek to repeal it or undermine it. And that's what's stopping us from getting about the business of making it better, in sharp contrast, I might add, to the Part D prescription drug program, which was passed by Republicans over Democratic objections. But once that program had traction and we saw there were things that could be done to improve it, Democrats worked with Republicans to make those improvements. The difference here is Republicans refuse to work with Democrats to make improvements and refinements. They just want to go and take the thing apart.
Yeah, remarkable. Congressman, I know you've got to go vote, so I'll let you go. But thank you so much for dropping by today. Congressman John Sarbanes.
Thanks very much, Tom.
From Maryland.
Take care.
Great talking with you.